Hi, I'm Nate Lucas, your host for the Kentucky Kernel Podcast, the University of Kentucky's very own student-led, award-winning newspaper. This episode, our editor-in-chief, Hannah Stanley, comes on to talk about her start in journalism, her biggest stories, and if anyone's ever gotten agitated at her for publishing a story. Then we'll finish it off with scoops out of the litter. A quick disclaimer, the opinions expressed on this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the opinions held by the Kentucky Kernel. All right, let's go. Hey everybody, I am recording this in post. I just completely forgot to introduce my new co-host, Giana Gallo, today. She's great, and in future episodes, I'm going to have her introduce herself and say hi with the introduction, but I just forgot. I'm doing a new format this time. But she'll be there in the future. All right, let's get to it. All right, hello, Hannah. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners really quick?
Sure. My name's Hannah Stanley. I am the editor-in-chief of the Kentucky Kernel Media Outlet, and I am a senior at the University of Kentucky.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate all your time and everything. Knowing that you're the editor-in-chief, you're a very busy woman. So now let's get into the questions. So I think anyone who regularly works at the Kernel is curious about your lore. So my first question for you is, how did you get started at the Kernel?
It's definitely been a long time running. I started out originally as a staff reporter my freshman year during the spring semester. And then I worked for the news desk predominantly and slowly became the assistant news editor in a very short time. And I think that's more because of COVID, and our staff was maybe 15 people in total. Wow. And then I became the news editor, and I was that for a year. Quickly became managing editor out of just, some chaos. And then I applied for the editor-in-chief position, interviewed with the board, which was probably the scariest thing I've ever done, and luckily got the position, and now I'm holding it.
So let me ask you a little bit about COVID. I've read a few of your articles from back then, and it seems like you just had to talk to a lot of public relations people, a lot of spokespeople, heads, and stuff like that. So what was your experience reporting during that time?
It definitely made it a lot more difficult to get a hold of people. Nobody was ever on campus or in their office, and when they were, they never wanted to talk to us. So it took constant emailing and a lot of phone calls, which is kind of a lot of the judge work I learned to do this summer. I'm not saying it's my favorite thing, but it eventually gets you to your end goal. It's just a much different point of view than what we've been doing the last 2 years post-COVID, where I was able to just go and knock on someone's door, or I could send a phone call and then they'll be like, yeah, come meet me here, and then I'll just go walk right over.
Yeah, so was that freeing for you to be able to do your first story like that?
It felt so much nicer. I was like, oh my God, I feel like a human again. I don't have to talk through a screen. And I did so many Zoom interviews, and there were so many problems with Wi-Fi or just trying to make sure that I quoted them properly and making sure that it was all just sorted. It was just a problem and a half.
Was there any story that you think might have benefited from that you got a cool point of view, maybe from the fact that it was Zoom? I know you reported a lot on students during COVID and what their perspectives were. So what do you think of that?
Well, I did a lot of coverage on COVID itself. That was kind of my beat, and I think it just fell into my lap because I was in a dorm and I was able to reach out to a bunch of different people, and a lot of the younger kids who were at the campus were trying to still have a sense of reality and get out of the COVID situation. So I think while it made it challenging to be able to actually report in person, it allowed people to share their opinions more freely, and I think it created less of a barrier to the social awkwardness that people sometimes have when interviewing, especially when people are like, oh my God, the newspaper wants to interview me. And sometimes it's a little more frightening than they want it to be.
Yeah.
How do you feel COVID changed your interviewing process, or kind of how you handle interviews?
Well, I originally, okay, let me start that over. I was a part of my high school newspaper, so I'm on 6 or 7 years running now. And I kind of had a good idea going into the college atmosphere of how to properly interview people and the do's and don'ts. And then with COVID, it was much more cold-faced. People didn't want to talk as often, and if they ever did talk, it was maybe 2 to 3 sentences. I was scratching the surface to pull a 400-word story together. So I kind of learned that there's different maneuvers you can get someone to talk about something that they might not be as comfortable with. And it was just kind of going into a more relaxed setting and being a lot more casual with it than being like, I'm Hannah Stanley, I need to know this, you need to tell me this, and then that be the end of the interview. Instead of making it like, oh, so I'm Hannah, I like to do this in my free time, like have more of a conversation, and then they would open up and allow them to feel more comfortable and I'd feel comfortable, and it just turned into like a casual conversation. And a lot of the times people will just ramble and they will tell you things that they probably shouldn't tell you, and it's the best way to get the information you need.
Yeah. So I know a lot of what you've done is breaking news. So do you think that kind of informed you to do breaking news? Because a lot of the stuff you do is really hard. Like, I couldn't see myself being in that situation and reporting on that type of stuff. I couldn't get someone to talk to me.
Yes and no. It kind of fell into my lap that I became more of a breaking news reporter and then became a news editor. When I was in high school, I did everything and anything from sports writing to photography to news and features. So I was kind of glad that I was doing something I already had a good handle on. I don't know if I'm glad that I stayed down the news route, just because I've always had that interest of like going to a sports game and reporting on it, or like going to shoot some fun photos and being like, oh my God, that's my photo on the top of the cover, or like something like that. But I love the news aspect of it, and just being able to break out that news to somebody else who might not know what's going on, or a lot of times it's more of a criminal like situation, and for like student safety, they need to know where they're going and like what to do in that moment. And I think it's just a beneficial aspect to me that I get to help somebody out in a different way. Yeah,
so it's really about you and your audience. I was going to ask you, do you think like the time crunch appeals to you at all?
Yeah, I definitely work better under pressure. Like I had to write my letter to the editor for the first special section, and it took me, I had like 2 weeks to write it, and I wrote it 2 hours before we sent to print. So it just, whatever happens, and usually when you're with news, you just have to cover it as quickly as you possibly can. And I think when it is breaking news, you only have so much to write anyways. So it's just get out what's the most important information and then run with it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into last year. You covered a lot of stories on UK's fraternity, the Farmhouse Fraternity. I was wondering if you can explain that situation with the hazing at that frat and how it impacted your life. You won a couple awards, so brag about yourself and the awards that you won. And just tell us about the situation.
Yeah, so obviously when it first broke out, it was the end of my sophomore year. Because it was towards like this, it was the middle to end of the spring semester, and usually you don't hear about too much going on then. If that date's wrong, sorry. It's been a while since the original story came out.
I believe so. I remember when it happened.
Yeah.
It was my freshman year. It was pretty far
into
that's
the year, I believe. Because it wasn't originally the fall class, if I recall, because they were doing their serenades, and which is just where a bunch of the fraternity members will go and serenade the girls at the different sororities, and they'll like throw out roses, and it's just like a fun little thing that you see them do. And there was all of a sudden like a huge like hearsay going on. Be like, oh my God, did you hear what happened? Like somebody's down at like the house. Like there's an ambulance over there. And their house is surrounded by like 4 or 5 other like sorority houses. And they're kind of like in this different cul-de-sac area. So it's very well known that like if someone's over there, they're right by Greek Park. So for those who know where Greek Park is, it's right over there. And they're by a bunch of apartments and housing. So all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, what's going on? Because there's not much else that could be over there. And then all of a sudden we started getting tips being like, a student is in an ambulance, like they're on their way to the hospital, like alcohol, like possible death. And we're like scrambling because at this point our staff is still very small because it was still post-COVID and nobody really wanted to like jump right into a newspaper. And I was like, me is still like a baby to this paper. I'm like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? So I was friends with a few different girls in sororities, and they would be like, you didn't hear this from me, but so-and-so is down at the house. And at that point, we still couldn't confirm a name. Like, it was me stretching out to different people. Like, we were trying to get a hold of the police. They didn't want to talk, which is understandable. Like, it's a student. Like, they're technically not supposed to say too much until they can confirm all the information. So the next thing we know, we're writing up a report saying that there's a student down at the hospital, and they're saying it's due to possible hazing and alcohol intoxication, which is not allowed on UK's campus, let alone in a fraternity house. And then he passed away, and I ended up writing his toxicity report, which I never thought it was like as big of a thing than it was, because I was just used to always writing like breaking news, like criminal reports. Like that was just something I knew what to do. And some of the other editors wrote the bigger stories of like, here's the information we know, like mine was kind of like the add-on piece. And next thing I know, it turned into like a full-blown investigation where we're doing the open records request, trying to figure out, was this actually hazing? Like, can they classify it? Because one of the big things with the university is they never want to like claim it as hazing, because it puts them in a really bad standpoint, and then it puts the fraternity in a bad standpoint. So the fraternity already got like temporarily suspended at that point because they had to do their own investigation, and then the university had to do theirs through the student code of conduct. And then they didn't want to talk to us, so we were kind of like stonewalled for a little bit. And then summer happened, so it was a lot more of like a relaxed situation. And then we got back to my junior year, so last year. And we got an email from the open records request people who are supposed to get back to us in no later than 10 days, I believe, like 2 technical business weeks. And they're like, I'm sorry, we can't give you this information, and then never really told us much information on why they couldn't.
Wow.
And it was originally addressed to somebody who no longer even worked at our paper. Like, she graduated. And we were just fortunate enough that we had her email and got notified on it because they CC'd our advisor. So I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then had to contact the lawyers, throw in a big lawsuit threat, and eventually opened up into giving us the full-blown records of like what happened. Obviously, there was stuff censored out, you know, like some of the other students' names, but they never claimed it as hazing.
Wow.
Which is a very controversial thing because you're not supposed to be drinking on campus, and those within Greek life kind of know more so what's okay and what's not okay. But they actually just passed Lofton's Law, which is now making hazing a actual illegal criminal case, and you have to go through like a whole investigation. You would be charged with it now, but I'm not really sure whatever happened to these specific individuals. They never really followed up with us when we tried to figure out like if they were arrested, if they were suspended from campus, because they censored out the names. But yeah, we wrote a beautiful package up on it. I went more in depth into the different quote unquote hazing that went on, and it was to my degree hazing. Like, I would never have done some of the things, let alone was it willingly, from what we were getting out of the report. And then my now past editor-in-chief, but she was the editor-in-chief during then, Rayleigh, she wrote more of a long story, going over just like recapping the event, more details from the actual investigation that we didn't have prior to it, and then we laid out this beautiful special section, and yeah, now we're up for a national nomination for it.
That's great. How did this story really impact your life? Like, looking now a year after?
I never thought it was such a big story. Like, obviously reporting on a student death is a very traumatizing thing, especially because his sister still goes here. Like, she lives on my street. I see her every day now, and she has a sign outside her house that says Lofton's Law. And I didn't always think it'd be such a relevant thing in my life after, because a lot of news stories, they come and go. Like, it's the news, it's changing every single hour, every single minute. You just run with it. And I think I don't want to say I took it for granted, because obviously, like, that's not a story anybody and everybody could write. But I was like, okay, I'm a part of the news. Like, I need to do this. Like, I need to write. And at that point, I was the news editor. So I was like, okay, I need to write this long story investigation with Rayleigh. Like, that's my job. Like, I owe it to this university. And, like, I put, obviously, like, my personal beliefs across and, like, put that on the side. But I think I definitely stray more away from the fraternity life now. I was in a sorority for a year. I dropped it. Just wasn't my cup of tea. I don't really go out and do a lot of like the fraternity life aspects anymore. Mm-hmm. My friend group's kind of on the outside of that now. It's just not an environment that I entirely want to surround myself in now.
Yeah, and what were some of the comments that you got after that story came out? Did you get anybody that was mad at you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I never knew this. When we were trying to write the special section the following year, I was obviously the news editor, so I was trying to contact the family in any way possible. And I did digging. Like, I messaged the sister over Instagram. I got her number. I got her group me. Like, did whatever I possibly could. I messaged the parents on Facebook. Like, I literally Googled them. Like, I did whatever I possibly could to get a hold of them. And I was completely stonewalled. And I was never told anything. And I was like, oh, my God, like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? Like, I can't write this without having some kind of quote from them. And luckily, they were coming on campus to talk at one of the fraternity events. And so we sent someone else from our staff because I was like, I can't get a hold of them, let alone can I attend the event, so I need someone else to go. So we sent one of our reporters, and somehow magically they talked to her. And I was like, what the heck is going on? I was like, why was I not contacted about this? Like, I reached out, and I know they, like, read the messages. Like, I would see the little, like, check mark change and, like, everything. So I was like, what's going on? Turns out during the interview, they told her, oh, are you Hannah Stanley? And she's like, no, I'm not. And they go, okay, because we don't want to talk to her. And I was like, hey, yo. I was like, what's going on?
Really?
Yeah. And they said that I wrote the toxicology report, which was one of the, like, main breaking stories after his death. And they didn't want anything to do with me after it because it upset them in a certain way that I didn't understand. I thought I was just reporting straight from the facts, and I did. And I even went back with it with my advisor. And I was like, what did I do wrong here? And he was like, nothing. Like, this is straight factual reports from the actual, like, toxicology report. Like, there's nothing else you can do. And he was like, it was just a time of mourning, and your name happened to be the one they remembered. And I was like, well, now they're going to remember it when I write an entire special section on it, and have yet to have any contact since.
Yeah, so you weren't even the one who interviewed their families.
Mm-mm.
Wow. Okay.
They did not want to talk to me at all.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was just like they talked to the colonel and then they gave us this quote.
Yeah, it was like a slap in the face. I was like, I worked so hard to, like, neutrally report on this and, like, make sure your voice is heard and, like, your son has, like, a legacy here. And no,
you're trying to promote good, and they didn't think that.
Yeah, but, I mean, I can't blame them. Like, I couldn't even imagine what I would be doing in that situation if I had my kid pass away, especially from quote-unquote hazing that they never wanted to claim. So,
yeah. Did you have anybody that was mad at you outside of this story, like fraternity guys come up to you at all?
Yes and no. I had a few people be like, wow, this is really awesome. And, like, we are really proud of, like, this work. Like, I didn't even know any of this. And, like, I had people who, when I say would never pick up a newspaper, never picked up a newspaper and told me, like, oh, my gosh, Hannah, I read that about, like, the hazing and everything. And I was, like, honored. I was like, oh, my gosh, thank you. Like, I'm really happy that you guys decided to pick up the paper and read about it, especially because they were fraternity members. Mm-hmm. But then there's also the few who are like, don't say this about our fraternity. Like, what do you know about what's going on? Like, have you heard anything? I'm like, first of all, you're talking to the, like, media right now. I was like, no matter what, whether you're talking to me, like, in person or in the office, like, I'm still the media. Unless you say off the record, like, I have this in the back of my head.
Right.
But you just have to pick and choose your battles, and it never came to a degree where I had to worry. But I definitely did have a few people take some steps back for me, and they're just like, oh, I'm not really going to ever say anything new about the fraternity or sororities anymore. I'm like, okay. Like, I had a job to do, and I did, and I'm proud of it, so.
Yeah, and those people are weird because why would they not expect you to, like, separate your work and you being their friend? But have you had any other stories where somebody's, like, gotten mad at you or you've had, like, a negative response?
I would never say, like, too mad. I've definitely had a few people come up and been a little more upset about how we've covered a certain thing, or maybe something wasn't entirely accurate. I mean, we've had a few hiccups this year already, but it's nothing you can't really prevent every single time. Like, it's news. What you hear and what you get is what you work with. And the beautiful thing about being more of an online media outlet now is we can change what's online. And we had a few hiccups with, like, some of the administration was just like, this isn't entirely worded properly, or, hey, this piece is missing. Like, here's this information. Like, they worked with us instead of being angry at us, which was, like, really nice. But I don't think I've ever had anyone, oh, wait, just kidding. I thought of a time. We covered the shooting at Theta Chi fraternity. And we definitely hit a few sore spots on that. And we had some people be upset that one we were reporting on an off-campus party, but it was through an association of an on-campus fraternity. And I think that just comes with the Greek life problem. It's just like, it's an off-campus but on-campus reality. Like, a lot goes on in both ways, and you just can't really win in the situation.
Yeah. You said that you had roughly 6 years in reporting, and you've just explained this amazing story that you just wrote. What do you feel like is the worst story, worst performing story? Not to call you out.
Okay, no.
That you've had. Because obviously you're still learning.
Yeah.
You're always still learning. But
are we talking school, college, anything?
You can do high school and college.
Oh gosh. Okay, let's
Kernel
think.
too.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, there's those first few high school stories starting out where, like,
they're a little rough.
Yeah, I, like, look back at them, and I'm like, oh, my God, this was so good at the time. And then I'm like, okay, Hannah, like, that's just not a full story at all. But, like, I was still starting out. Mm-hmm. Let's say one of them, we did, like, a Valentine's special section kind of thing. And it was, like, a matchmaker situation. And it was just, like, all over the place. Like, I really appreciate my teacher for being so nice to me about it. But, like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, maybe that was good then. But, like, any reporter who looks back at their work and is like, that's so good, they're lying to themselves. Like, if you can't look at yourself and be like, I've grown from that, like, that's the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. And, like, in college, obviously, same thing starting out. Like, there was a few things from freshman and sophomore year that are, like, the news channel and being, like, more campus life, but it was definitely like those fluff pieces that we just needed to like fill certain things that I'm looking at, and there's like 2 or maybe 2 sources in them, and they're like 300 to 400 word stories. Like, they're not good. There's like no substance to them, but that's just kind of what you have to do to like rebuild it back up. And I definitely think I've grown from them at least. So yeah.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, what do you feel now, since you're the editor-in-chief of the Kernel, is the most important skill to have?
Ooh. I would say there's 2. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest being communication. Obviously, we work in a world of words. Like, it's inevitable. You have to know how to use and speak the proper language when you're in the office and then when you're back in your social, like, personable life. But I've also learned I don't know what's the proper word for it, but, like, separating my personal life from my work life, because I lived and breathed the Kernel all these past 3 years and even now. But I've finally grown to the point, I think, at an editor-in-chief that I'm able to say, okay, I have all these really strong desk heads that I don't need to be overbearing and watching every single move that's going on. Like, I can go and live a little. Like, I can hang out with my friends. Like, last year, I probably slept in my house more than I ever, like, enjoyed just my daytime there. Like, I only paid rent to sleep somewhere because I was always at the office editing stories, working, or whatever it may be, and it was just like something I've always known. And then now with editor-in-chief, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can go home at 5 p.m.
Make dinner?
Yeah, no, literally, like, make dinner and actually save the money that I'm working so hard for and not spend it out on takeout. And it's just, like, hard because, like, a lot of the staff are my friends, and I spend so much time with them. I've grown, like, right alongside them these past few years. But it's hard when you're in a work environment to set that aside sometimes. And, like, Abby Kucher, one of my best friends, but she's also my managing and photography editor. And it is very difficult to be like, I love you so much, but I need this work stuff done. Like, I need us to change the route that we're going on. Like, talk business. And then a few minutes after, okay, back to, like, Miss Friendly, like, Hannah and Abby, and back to our, like, joyful little selves. But I feel like being able to even, like, have that communication and be, like, talking direct to my staff, and then being able to, like, like, let's debrief and, like, be humans again, you know?
Mm-hmm. So my last question for you is, what went into the decision about the Kernel transitioning into digital news?
I think it was a long time running. Mm-hmm. We always had an idea of what we wanted to become and shift over from being the print edition to more of a media outlet. And just with news constantly changing and what's always going on, we have to adapt to it. And we're in such a technology-driven world that the best way we can do that is appealing to people on our technological platforms instead of the print edition itself.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it is like, I think Ryan talked about our media advisor. He said you have to make the avenues and then people will want to come to it. Mm-hmm. You know, people don't want to start it, but they want to join it for sure once they see it doing well. So just have to establish it.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a lot of success alone in just like our TikTok platform. We have doubled almost doubled, almost tripled our followers now in just this year alone. And we have like 25,000 likes on a TikTok, 30 on another. Before we were getting like 300. And it was just because we weren't appealing to the younger generations and that we needed to. And even with like publishing stuff on our Facebook and Twitter, like changing that format a little bit just to appeal to them in the captions instead of the story itself, because anybody can read the story. But if we're not reaching them in their specific demographic or how they want to be listening or reading or watching the news, then what are we doing?
For the people that still like to have physical newspapers in their hand, will Kentucky Kernel still be available physically, or will all be digital?
Oh, no, we're still printing. We switched from a weekly to special sections, so we put out 2 already. One was our back to school, and that following week was actually our pigskin preview. We didn't plan to stack it like that. It just kind of is whatever turn of events that happens. And we don't have anything for September, just because it's more of a dry month. And then October, we're going to be hitting the streets with 2 for the Big Blue Madness event going on with our basketball teams. And then the following one will be the election coverage. So it just depends on what's going on throughout the year. Obviously, if there's something really big breaking news, we'll still print it. But we only distribute on campus now, so we're not off campus at all. But we do still have the good old paper newspapers. I got them hanging in my office. Yep. I like seeing them.
Yeah. Some people really like them still. I mean, I know especially last year, I was like thinking I was going to create a scrapbook, and I would take all of them and like read them, and then I'd be like, maybe I want to put this on my walls. I never did that, but I still have all of them. Yeah.
Hey, that's what all matters.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have like weird scrapbooks of photos that we've taken. Because I know my girlfriend like last week did one where she just took a bunch of magazines and newspapers and stuff and made like a weird collage because she was bored. Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of people have some weird stuff like that, stuff that we don't know about. All right, now it's time to transition to our segment, Scoops Out of the Litter, where I tell you national news that you need to know as a college student. And our first headline is Coco Gauff wins the U.S. Open for the first time at 19 years old. What do you guys think about that?
How?
I'm 19, and I could never do that.
No. And she's one of the youngest to do it since Serene. I'm like, what do you... like?
Yeah, I don't know why we can't get a men's competitor like this. We haven't won in so long in men's tennis, but now we have like 2 generational talents in women's tennis. But anyways, I read the AP News article about this, and it was like a little weird feature kind of announcement thing. And I thought it was really cute because it was just like they were talking about how she was on her phone like 10 minutes before the game. And I feel like that's so relatable. I feel like if I was a professional tennis player who was about to go to the finals, I would like miss my match on accident playing on my phone or something.
Just quickly scrolling on TikTok.
Exactly.
Just one more.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting too that they talked about how she like read stuff about herself on social media. You know, like I don't know if I could do that, especially in a sport like tennis too, where you're the only person on the court. Like you have no excuses. You know.
Well, and she was super doubted. Like, there was, like, I was reading some of those comments. The things people were saying were harsh. And I think that's also the problem with, like, how much we rely on digital and social media at times. But she used the quote that it was gasoline to her fire. And she sure proved them wrong. And especially at 19. Like, that's just even more absurd. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, that's tough for a 19-year-old to have all that pressure and then expect to perform. I mean, the way she performed, she really did overcome all of the hate against her.
Yeah, and I think the even bigger part of it was she was not afraid to be herself. Like how you're mentioning her being on her phone, even right after, she tried to like FaceTime her brother, and she was like taking selfies and TikToks the entire time, and she was just enjoying the moment. And I feel like tennis is such like it's a very respected sport, but it's also a very serious sport. It kind of reminds me of golf in certain ways. Like you're very professional in it versus like some of the other like football and baseball. It's a little more playful. Like you can kind of have that fluidity with it. But she was just enjoying it, and I enjoyed it. And she even like called out like the ref during some of the games, and like even her other like competitors. And I was just like, "You go, girl! Like hold them to it. Like you don't see that anymore. It's just like stay in your lane." And she was not. And I think she was like a great force to be reckoned with because she just kind of changed the face of tennis. I feel like.
I completely agree. Completely agree.
I think it's really interesting because I knew a few tennis players when I was in high school, and I feel like when they got in the game, they were like nutcases. Like they were crazy. Like when you see them breaking their rackets and stuff like those clips, they do not play about it.
Yeah, they
not at all. All right, so for our second headline, I have Trump stops by Iowa State game and a frat house there. So he was tailgating this weekend at the Iowa State game. And I got to say, I know Iowa's this huge place for, measuring how much presidential candidacy you have. But why would you go to a game that ended up being 2013? I mean, that 22-13, like that stinks. Like I would much rather go.
Impressive. It's a great game.
Yeah, I would much rather go to an SEC atmosphere.
UK game.
Yeah. Maybe not the last one.
No, not the EKU game.
Yeah, maybe not UK versus Eastern Kentucky where we choke a little bit.
Yeah.
But I feel like this event really just stood out to me because I feel like with DeSantis, the other leading candidate in the Republican Party, he just has no interpersonal skills at all. And then Trump, I see all these clips of him, and he's just like chilling with the bros and stuff.
Flipping hamburgers.
Yeah.
Tailgating.
Yeah, he might be like in court right now, but he really does not care, and he's gonna bro out and do whatever he wants. So I just thought that was funny. What did you guys think about this story?
Biting my tongue a little bit here.
Yeah, I honestly don't feel like it's really real. I didn't believe the story until I actually saw pictures and he's like holding a football on AP News, and I was like, oh, this is legit.
Yeah.
He actually went to a college campus and chose the location of a fraternity house.
Yes. And, well, okay. I'll put it out there. I'm not the biggest Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Just different viewpoints, which is totally fine. Like, everyone disagrees. And like Iowa's known to be like a more of a swing state. Like you could go either way. So it makes sense why you want to go there and you want to get that appeal. And honestly, I think going to like a college campus is kind of smart because a lot of kids haven't voted yet, don't know how to vote, haven't been able to because they weren't legal of age to do it when they were in the 2020 election. So for him to be like, okay, I'm going to appeal to the younger generation who may not want to vote or know how to vote, I will say smart on his part. Second of all, going to the more relaxed route where people feel, oh, he's more personable. Like maybe I'll do that. But then it also goes into you're running for the president of the United States. You can't just be so relaxed at a tailgate or a fraternity house. Like, you got to show yourself a little more respect, in my opinion. Like, I don't know if I want my hopefully not, future president, like, at a fraternity house or grilling out with one of the bros. Like I just feel like there needs to be a certain part of respect. And, like, how you were mentioning, like, DeSantis, like, Trump purposefully goes where DeSantis goes. Like, it is a, like, tradition at this point. Like, I was looking back at some of the like stories and the campaign trails. He goes because he knows he can overpower him, because you were saying the social connection isn't the same. Trump knows how to appeal to media.
Yeah.
And that's what he does.
Yeah, I saw something that DeSantis went to like 99 counties in Iowa. Right, like you can see like he's really trying to put himself out there, and Trump went to 6, and like you can, just like you said, you can see that shift and change.
I think the most unbelievable thing that I saw from this story, because I could totally see Trump doing this, like going to a game and like grilling out, just because he's like a little weird like that, but like also charismatic at the same time. But I saw a photo of him where there was a guy flipping him off, and so he just gave him like a little bird, like he gave him this. Yeah.
See, but like that's exactly like with what you were saying, like be professional.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
It was a pretty funny photo.
I can see the laughter behind it 100%.
Oh, yeah.
But this man's also got 4 criminal charges.
Right.
Like,
I don't
he's
know if
got
this is the
cases
right
against
time
him.
to
I'm like,
do that.
maybe show a little more respect so the court's a little more lenient in what's being decided here. Like,
all right, let's go to our last final news story. So Massachusetts teen dies from one chip challenge. So have you guys done the one chip challenge?
absolutely not.
No.
I don't do hot or spicy things at all.
Yeah, I've not done it either. I sweat from like hot Cheetos.
I was just gonna say, I don't even eat hot Cheetos.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. I can't do hot Cheetos, so I would never do the one chip challenge. But I mean, I've seen videos online on social media of like kids being paid to try the one chip challenge.
Insane.
Just some crazy stuff, homeless people, really sad stuff. And I guess this is just a story that it went too far.
Yeah.
Very sad.
And even the packaging of this chip, like it's a small box, like triangle box, and you open it and you have to it's a seal thing. It's legit.
And there's warning labels all over
Yep,
it too.
all over.
But the worst part was, it's like, I don't know how in depth you guys went. He didn't even willingly do it. Like his friend gave him the chip. Like, it didn't seem like he knew what it was from what I was reading. And that's the worst part. Like, imagine just your friend being like, hey, you want a tortilla chip? Like, it's just like a Cool Ranch Dorito. And then all of a sudden you're on your way to the hospital, and then your family's dealing with your death because of what someone else did.
Right.
Yeah, that's
over
horrible.
A challenge.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of the cinnamon challenge.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure. I feel like we were probably in middle school by then.
Yeah.
If we date ourselves a little bit, I think maybe early high school. But that one was also really deadly and scary. And my mom always warned me about that one.
Right. Well, there's just the certain challenges that kids will appeal to, and it's going back to that social media thing.
Yeah.
Kids will see videos and be like, oh my god, I'm gonna try this, or oh my gosh, I'm gonna make someone else do it. And it was the same thing with the cinnamon challenge. Or I would always see videos of people doing this, and I'm like, first of all, I don't like cinnamon that much.
Yeah.
Second of all, why would I ever put a spoonful of cinnamon into my mouth? And then now you got these super hot chips that are the two hottest peppers combined into this chip. Absolutely not.
Yeah, why is this always about incurring bodily pain on yourself? Why can we not have go work out challenge?
Yeah, right.
Go get ice cream
I was
challenge.
just
something
What about ice
fun.
cream?
Yeah,
Brownies,
seriously.
Doing it for the
Anything.
bit. That's what
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, experience happiness challenge. Seriously. But listeners, thank you all for listening to the Kentucky Kernel News Podcast. We are so grateful for your listenership. And thank you, Hannah, again for coming on to the podcast. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. All right. Outro song.